Great. Meeting is now streaming live on
Okay.
live streaming service.
Meeting is now streaming live on custom live streaming service. We are live. So any banter at this point. It's just
What brings joy to my heart when I look around Calvary?
happening?
It starts with the processional. It starts with all the people who are
Nino.
Nino.
That was kind of glorious.
So our intro music.
Yeah.
All right, let me see.
Yeah, it's kind of nice.
Okay, Calvary Episcopal Church is live now. If I bring that up, will I be entering a time warp? Probably. All right, I'll try to share it on my personal page. Share now.
Are there any people? There are 8 people out there. There's David Johnson and Kendra Martin. I can see it on my phone. I can't see it here, but this is fun.
8 people. How about that?
Well, welcome all. We'll get started here in a few minutes. 8:53.
Yeah.
Still new things happening in the age of COVID here at Calvary.
Taking strides. Look at us. We are all in our separate offices and are in the actual Calvary building. So there is proximity, but not the same room.
Not in appropriate proximity.
That's right.
There's Zeta.
Oh, great.
Okay, I've got to figure out how to get back over there on
They do.
Yeah. Well, I was on this. I was telling the others here that Ardell and I were on a concert Zoom Friday night for a friend, and somebody was in Singapore, and when they got on, they said, hello from the future. It's tomorrow in Singapore. So
Nice.
quite that far ahead, but I can see that my head is saying things from a few seconds ago on Facebook. So kind of coming to the future from the past.
Oh, Paul McLean, you are talking on Facebook while on Zoom being streamed to face. Oh, it's
I'm so high tech. It's amazing.
everywhere. Omnipresent.
Ruthie is actually using my Facebook page. I will reveal.
Yeah, she says this there. But
Talk about Incarnation. Let's see. How do I share this? Oh, I'm going to go back over and be me and not Calvary. That'll help. I think maybe then I can share it. Well, let's see. One would think at this late stage in the pandemic, something like figuring out Facebook Live would just be second nature to some people.
Sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. Whenever we're doing morning prayer, sometimes it seems like the comments come through and other times they don't, and I go back and I look at the comments and it has only shown me some of them, or I haven't noticed them. Whatever's happening there. I'm more apt to blame Facebook these days for most of the ills in the world.
What's wrong with the
world? My own.
All right, I'm going to do the link over here. See if they like that. Okay, here it goes. Shared.
Susan Appling is letting us know that indeed we are live. Happily.
Oh, hi, Susan. Welcome.
So
you didn't think this scripted banter was exactly what we got on here to do?
Keep it up, folks. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Go. All right. Good to see y'all.
And Jenny.
Thomas, Susan.
Roseanne.
Roseanne.
Oh, Roseanne from Texas.
From Texas.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Global. Before you know it.
Global. Texas is global to us.
Very nearly another country, yeah. Yeah, we'll go ahead and get started in a few minutes here as we prepare for our first of 2 weeks of this forum on COVID and the Incarnation, but we'll let people keep signing on figuring out where we are and why we are and who we are.
Looks like we have our first question of the morning from Jill Piper. What are you all up to?
Wait, so, okay, where are you seeing that? I didn't see, it doesn't show me Jill
Text.
Piper.
He texted
Oh,
it.
the text.
I just got a text from her too. Yeah.
Robin, our tech support, just
Oh,
texted.
YouTube. Jill Piper, what are you all up to? Yeah.
This is a Sunday forum, Jill.
Mhm. Here we are.
Oh, Scott, I think you froze up.
Y'all were freezing a little bit there. That makes me nervous.
Maybe I should not be.
Oh, sorry. Hey.
Maybe I won't watch it on the Facebook. Maybe I'll.
And they're frozen.
Uh-oh.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm turning off. I'm turning off my streaming, and I'm gonna turn off my little Wi-Fi on my phone just to see.
I'm turning off phone
For-
Wi-Fi too.
So,
Yeah.
Robin, it will be entirely up to you to get us these questions because I'm no longer watching myself. Zoom. That's weird. This is
Who do I
very.
Gail Spence, Rachel Prim. That's a name I haven't said hello to in a while. Friend from Little Rock.
Cool.
Hope you stay on. I think we're gonna have a conversation for what, Amber, half an hour or so, and then some questions. And
Yeah. We'll get started at 9 o'clock and start moving from there. I think Missy and I have really mastered the early morning banter of morning prayer. So this is interesting to have two other people try to fill up a space with, and I'm not as used to doing this every morning at morning prayer.
we don't have Missy's bantering skills, among many other skills.
She's got so much stuff in there. Sitting in the corner, getting a look. Well, I've got 8:59. If you are joining us, this is our first of 2 weeks of a forum on COVID and the Incarnation. We had been sitting around kind of thinking about this idea of what we could do. We've got a bunch of different classes that we offer at Calvary, that some groups you can tie into. Of course, everything's on Zoom right now, but we had been thinking about a way to sort of bring back what would normally happen on a Sunday mornings, which are our forum hours in the Great Hall. A way to plug in and learn something new without necessarily sitting down and committing to a few weeks of yet another Zoom call in your already Zoomy life. So this is what we came up with and what we really were interested in talking about, and thought it might be timely and might be interesting to you all to hear about what we've been thinking in terms of this pandemic and our theology, and how we as Christians and Christian leaders are thinking about and sort of have been murkily working our way through how we are a faithful people in a time of separation. So I'll go ahead and start us off in saying welcome to you all. Welcome to Scott and Paul. I'm Amber. We're all priests at Calvary. If you are not from Calvary, it's a parish in downtown Memphis, Tennessee, and we are glad you're here. Welcome. So I thought it might make sense for us to start off with just beyond the welcome. Oh, let me say, put in your questions so that as we go along, our fearless tech guru, Robin, who has managed to successfully wrangle us all into this space, and it's actually live and it's actually working. She will be relaying your questions and conversations to us as we go along. So hope you'll chime in. Because there might be something that sticks out to you, but some things might be unfamiliar in what we're going to be talking about. And so I wanted to just begin with maybe a beginner's definition of what we mean about what we are talking when we say the word incarnation. Unless Paul and Scott, you guys wanted to, you've got do you have one of those in your back pocket? A really handy definition.
Is it freezing? Sorry, I
You
stopped.
froze up. Yeah,
I think we froze.
Did we freeze?
yeah, but I think it's good now.
Unfrozen? Did you ask a question in that freezing time?
Well, I was just asking if you wanted to, if you had, a really succinct, easy definition of what the incarnation is, what we mean when we say incarnation. You are freezing. Do you mind turning off your phone internet?
We are struggling getting our embodied selves across the internet.
If you, does Robin have?
Robin says it's freezing and then it's catching up with itself. Okay, so there'll be gaps and whatnot.
Okay.
Let's just give it a little bit more of a go. I think you were asking if I had a succinct definition or way of talking about what incarnation is, what we mean when we talk about it. Carne is meat.
Right.
I think it's meant to be literally visceral. And I think it's one of the places where, the Gospel of John that is the more ethereal in many ways, everybody, Jesus kind of seems to be floating about 4 inches above the ground and people just fall down when he shows up and says something. Seems in some ways less embodied, but it all starts with this. The beginning, the prelude, the prologue to John is the word, the wisdom of God, this creative self that we can't quite even describe, became flesh, dwelt among us. Eugene Peterson, I think, says pitched his tent among us, tabernacled among us, built a home, like all of these things, what it means to be a body in the world.
Yeah.
Starts there.
And of course, John is the one with the great resurrection appearance where Jesus is actually eating fish, right? Like is participating bodily again, even after this death and this sort of, he can pass through walls as though they're nothing. You can touch his flesh and feel the wounds still. You're right. You think of John in one way, but he's much more complicated than that. Paul, did you want to add into that?
Well, I think that for me, there have been a couple of big moves in theology. I think growing up, getting my head around God coming into the world as Jesus, as one human being, the embodiment of God. And then the movement from there is God being embodied in each one of us individually, is an extension of incarnation, the incarnation of Christ, that God, and John does a lot of abiding, how God abides in us, Christ abides in us. And I think the big move that I've been making during COVID, especially this summer, is more God abides not in each of us, does abide in each of us individually, but God abides in us as a community. And I think, of course, the church, one of the big metaphors for the church is the body of Christ. And then seeing that communal and relational way of.
Uh-oh. We dropped Paul for a second.
We drop. Are we embodied again?
We're embodied again.
Facebook.
We thought we caught most of Paul talking about the embodiment of the community and the embodiment of God in us, and I think that's one really important piece of this that we sometimes miss when people talk about the incarnation. They think of God made flesh, God with meat on, literally, but that in the incarnation, we're also talking about what Jesus did to humanity, right? Athanasius is one of the early theologians who says, as they start to argue about what it means for Jesus to be 100% God and 100% human, Athanasius is the one who argues, anything that isn't taken up into God isn't redeemed. So that the line is that God became human so humans could become gods, right? Like that the spheres of the mortal and the divine meshed in Jesus. And insofar as we are in that life in God, our lives are fused into that as well, making it possible for these pieces, these disparate pieces, to be brought back together. What had been broken could be made whole again. And that it was really happening in human bodies, right? One of what came out of the early church was this clinging to the both that that there were things worth dying for, that there were things worth giving up your bodily life for, but that it's your body itself that was that mattered in this equation, right? And of course, drawing from Jewish tradition, in which we have zero accounts of a sort of spiritual disembodied afterlife, but we have all of the tradition pointing to a good world that God created, and caring for that world and working always to redeem it. And we, of course, believe that happened in the person of Jesus Christ. So that's a little bit about what we mean with incarnate, just by a theological term, incarnation. Did you guys want to add anything to that?
I was going to add one thing, is that a lot of times when we hear about those old early debates about the nature of Christ and what it meant to be fully God, fully human, I think we think of them in very abstract, academic, esoteric if not academic terms, right? That this is, why do we have to struggle with this concept? But what strikes me is when Athanasius was saying something, I think, also about how humans are actually changed.
Right.
And we're simply not changed by someone decreeing to us, this is the way things are. Forgiveness, I can declare forgiveness to Paul for the rudeness that he regularly visits upon me. And
Paul.
Yeah, that's me.
I can declare it, but the declaration has just actually started the work of actually restoring the relationship, because we're bodies, because he's already, I'm tightened up in my belly, and I'm angry, and all my emotions are in place. So bringing it into that realm is not just like getting the cosmic answer to who Jesus was correct on a quiz.
Right.
It's really worth pursuing, the church said, because it tells us something about how we're actually formed as moral creatures, as people in community, as the community that Paul talked about, where this is our Paul just a minute ago, and the other Paul, the body of Christ, right?
Right.
So
right.
Anyway, they're not just academic angels on the head of a pin kind of conversations. We're really trying to figure out how we work and how we heal.
And the incarnation is just absolutely bedrock to what we believe and who we are as Christians. And we mean this as a bodily experience. What makes, the centrality of our faith is that belief in the incarnation, right? We have revelation coming to us from all different sides, from your experience, from scripture, from everywhere. But what we think this action, the central action of God was actually becoming one of us. And that is what our redemption and our salvation rests in. So it's been something that's important to Christianity, or of utmost importance to Christianity, this concept. And what we found with COVID is sort of a continuation of this disembodied existence that has been happening for, or emphasis that's been happening for a while with globalization, internetization of our lives, right? That the church, from our tradition, the English tradition, we call it a parish, right? Because it's in a place. And it's a community that voluntarily bands together for the common good of a place, right? And Calvary is a particularly good example of a church that has very much in mind what's going on around it, not just in the city of Memphis, but really what's going on around our block, who is passing by us, who is in need around us. And what COVID to me has done is sort of exacerbate or hastened this this existence which is other than embodied, right? When you're on the internet, place doesn't matter anymore. Your bodies matter in the sense of, they get fatigued or whatnot, but we find ourselves taken away from the places that we are at, which is what we do in church, is care for a place specifically. And we do this voluntarily. I think it's one of the only places in the world that is really dedicated, like we exist only for that. I mean, to worship God, but that it's a communal experience set in a place. What do you all? So we've been struggling through what it means to be faithful Christians. People of Calvary, people of our good world, and what it means for us to be believers, and not only just believers in the Incarnation, but reliant on the Incarnation in our faith, and what it means for us now to be coming to you live from our separate offices, though we're all in Calvary, to you in your homes now. Do you want to comment on that?
I might talk about disembodiment. I felt that in mid-March when I learned that hospitals would no longer allow me to make visits, and in talking with parishioners, healthcare professionals, and others, I said it's not advisable. And that's a big part of what I see as my job or ministry, is making hospital visits. And I wondered, how in the world am I going to do this? And one thought that came to me was, I've been meaning to build a relationship with hospital chaplains here in the area. And like we all had a big learning curve on Zoom and Facebook Live, I had a learning curve on getting to know the chaplains in the hospitals and nursing homes. And one that I particularly connected with was Chaplain Dave at St. Francis Hospital. We had 2 parishioners at St. Francis for almost 2 to 3 months. Each had COVID, each had a lot of other things going on. Family members were desperate to get news about them. I was wanting to visit them, but I couldn't. But I would call Chaplain Dave and built a relationship with him, and he made those visits on our behalf. And there was one day where he went to one patient's room who was in a COVID isolation ward, and through the window, he just did his hands like this, and the patient could see his collar and see his hands. And the patient made the first movement he had made in a while, made the sign of the cross. And I was able to relay that to the patient's mother. And it was just phenomenal what that meant to her. And so Chaplain Dave became my embodiment. And there was something beautiful about incarnation happening in relationship. My relationship with Chaplain Dave, his relationship to the patient, my relationship to the family, our communal relationship with each other, that Christ was somehow present in all that. And that was something, somehow, I hope that continues, where I don't see myself as a Lone Ranger in the future, because I don't think incarnation is meant to be that. And I think part of what Scott was talking about, this organic nature of incarnation, is growing. And I think that's been a growth for me, is learning how communal this is called to be, and how do we take that forward.
Yeah. Another thing is, you're describing that, it occurs to me, I share, Amber, all of your broader concerns about what the media that we use to communicate does to our spiritual lives, even though they can be opportunities like Paul describes. But when everything got swept off the table, it also swept off a lot of just idealized notions of what church is. And the opposite of embodied, I think, is ideas. That's kind of a Platonic thing, right? There's this ideal of what a church is, and it looks like this, and we do the thing, and so it swept that off. And the opportunity, I think, then, that I've been just astonished to watch people respond, is to say, the ideal went away. The way that we know how to encounter one another as bodily creatures, as worshiping creatures, as Christian people, just got blown up. Mm-hmm. What does it look like to rebuild from that, to say, what were we trying to accomplish with God, with one another, when we were doing that in our building in the ways that were familiar? And so Paul's example is a lovely one that kind of holds all of this together. It's inadequate, right? We don't want to spend the rest of our lives on one side of a screen, one side of a window, making the sign of a cross. And yet, because we have this kind of history of embodied relationship that we draw on.
Yeah.
You know, these are embodied gestures that we use what's in front of us. The question of how long we can do this or that, question of is real. The kind of, and the question of I think we need to be real about what damage it's doing to us too, as we're just not we're not getting the touch, the embrace, the little embodied gestures and context that we know are crucial also to our spiritual lives and our emotional lives and our relational lives. So holding both of those, celebrating the way we were let go of some ideals and said, actually, maybe there is a way to safely, even during a pandemic, be the body of Christ to the hurting people downtown, and yet acknowledge our limitations. And
I think I was telling somebody yesterday, you know, just reflecting on something of a similar theme here, that I don't think Episcopalians realized how flexible we actually could be until this moment in time, right? Like we always make jokes about, you know, you can't change a light bulb without offending someone because their great grandmother donated that light bulb. But every time we've swept things off the table, what's been remarkable to me is the amount of grace that has been extended to the three of us, to the people who have been planning, to our bishop, to the, I mean, wanting what we can have, and yet, I don't know, I've never, I'm continually surprised at the grace that I find with people throughout this as we try and try again to embody this. And I think one of the, I mean, part of my struggle in this is watching what, right, how far, how much can we do this? And sometimes that's a thing that I judge day to day, like I can do this today, I'm not sure I can do this tomorrow. But that looking at the bigger picture for me, I think about what is, you know, what sort of harm is going to be done forever from this, in terms of the loss of the local, right? The things that are in our places. We've seen, I mean, how many restaurants, local small businesses go under through this. Who knows what the church is going to look like after this. You know, Calvary's looking great, but the places that were just hanging on, are they going to be still hanging on after this? That, you know, our educators, our teachers have been taxed to beyond, while the students are saying, you know, I read a statistic yesterday that was something like at Oxford, 71% of students would vote to delay the start of the school if they could just learn in person there. Mm-hmm. Right. So I've got this conflicting sort of sense of like hope and doom, that or this hope that people really realize how much the internet didn't actually work for us in a lot of ways, that we need something, that it is a stopgap that will work for a while wondering how much we can, you know, that our eyes have been opened in a way to this, but then at the other end, you know, how much recovery is possible as well. So that's what bounces around in my head about those questions.
I mean, part of the notion of being embodied is just being truthful about our limitations. Mm-hmm. The wonders of being defined have the edges of me define me, and also the frustrations of being limited. So I think maybe if we can take your concerns as kind of a vigorous and truthful embrace that we are limited creatures and we need to be truthful about what we lack and what we need. I think then we can find ways to make the connections that sustain us if we keep that in front of us.
Agreed. I wonder if we shift a little bit to talking about what we've done specifically, Paul, you've mentioned a little bit about your work with the chaplains in the area, and sort of navigating how you were still able to be present now through other people. If we might reflect a little bit on what it's meant for us in terms of our specific actions at Calvary, the sort of things, the things that we've decided, and where we've gone, maybe where we went wrong, maybe where we went right. I will never in my life forget the first day that we got shut down, and getting Scott's bike clip to get his phone so we could just live stream from Facebook last minute, and my ridiculous face not realizing that it was live, like, where are we? But a sort of willingness to jump in there, that it couldn't be embodied, but we knew right away we had to do something for you, for all of you out there. Couldn't be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Look, Paul,
Well, I'm just grateful. It's amazing. I think what some of our watchwords have been flexibility, and maybe another watchword has just been grace, or maybe just an appreciation for each other's efforts. And as we've learned technology, learned these things, but it's been amazing the flexibility of the congregation. I think how your response to the daily office services, to live stream worship, and the encouragement you've given us and given our technical team and others. Talk about Incarnation, how it's interesting that a year or so before this happened, a young man named Noah Glenn and his family were felt like they needed to be a part of the body of Christ at Calvary. And lo and behold, a year later, his gifts and the gifts of many others helped make a lot of the technology things happen. And, he would be the first to acknowledge it's been a team effort with Robin and so many others. But it's just the flexibility and grace that I've seen this year, and the efforts that we've all made together, and a really feeling that we're all in this together. And the extension of our community. Roseanne in Texas is with us today. I mean, Scott has an old friend from Little Rock who's here today, and there's probably several others from around the country, perhaps around the world, who are in on this forum today. And it's just been amazing how the reach of Calvary has extended and created almost a new embodied community online, which is phenomenal.
so true. And the thing that occurs to me when I think back to what we some things that I think that helped this process for us, that we committed to early on. We talk about being embodied as being in space. It's also in time, right? It's to be a creature of time and space. And early on, we felt, the three of us and all of our liturgical planners thought, you know what? I think we could produce something slicker if we pre-recorded it and put it together. Mm-hmm. But for us here at Calvary, it seems like if we could have something from the Calvary chancel in real time, it would be worth that, so that we had a sense that, we are embodied creatures gathering by this inadequate means from where we are, but in this moment. Mm-hmm. And when we rolled quickly into Holy Week, we started thinking about how are ways that people can create space in their home while they're connected in time to people in other homes, and so time has been one thing that came into it. How can we, and the way the daily office, the morning prayer and Compline has grown into this just real bedrock of practice, where people in their homes are saying the office, which is, it was one of the ways it was designed to be said, but knowing they're doing it in concert with other people praying in other places. That's an expansion of the prayer life of Calvary, I think, and a deepening of it that is one of the more remarkable graces of this time.
Yeah, agreed. That really now you could log in on Facebook at about any time, and you can't go back very far on the page, because it's just morning prayer. And we added those early morning devotions and all sorts of things. Just trying to. Have we frozen again? Are we good?
I don't think so.
I saw a little jump. That was all. And I've heard people report as well that they've actually made spaces for this experience in their homes. I don't know how many people are just driving around, or getting around, doing their jobs or whatever it is, to make this, but who have made spaces in their homes to embody the liturgy a little bit more, so they can stand and they can kneel. One of the important things about being at home now that strikes me is that you can sing at home. It's definitely not singing with a choir. It's not singing in Calvary, but the number of people I've heard say, I'd rather stay home so I can sing, was striking to me as we think about our liturgies.
Yeah. We learned things that really mattered to us in ways we might not have.
Yeah.
Came stark, the things that we're just starved for.
Yeah. Yeah. We also immediately, in concert together with the diocese, but had decided together to what is our word, pivot to morning prayer initially, when we couldn't all be together. And I wonder if we should talk about that at all, just as a sense of what it does mean to draw on the pieces of our tradition. Can't have bread and and wine in the space. Well, I suppose you could break some open at home and enjoy whatever you would like. But we did decide that we would change to a piece of our tradition that honored the fact that we couldn't all gather at the table. And we did that for a good long while, till, when was it? June, July?
So I think July.
Mid-June.
Mid-June, yeah.
Mid-June.
Yeah, we did. Related to the way the office is I was fascinated by this term too, to go back to this very stable, ancient form, because we found out it was made for this.
Right.
I had a friend, priest, who used to say when they used to have 8 o'clock morning prayer, they canceled it after, because no one was coming, and got a call from a parishioner who said, "Why did you cancel morning prayer?" He said, "Well, nobody came." So I'm just going to say myself. So, well, I travel all over the world, and I set my clock to, this was Little Rock, set my clock to Little Rock time, so that 8 o'clock in the morning, I open my prayer book if I'm on a plane or if I'm in my bed or wherever it is, and I know somebody else is saying their prayers with me. And like that always spoke to the heart of morning prayer to me, that it was made for both communal celebration, but also for people being separate. And so when we return to that, we found within the tradition, we had this gift. We didn't make it up from scratch. And I think it helped bear the sadness. We needed something sturdy at that time, right? We didn't need Paul, Amber, and Scott's riffs on the day, right? We needed something bigger than ourselves, and morning prayer for us at Calvary felt like that. And some people really reconnected for a moment earlier in their lives when morning prayer was the more regular language of Sunday celebration before the 79 prayer book, when some congregations would strike us now as more Methodisty or something, but those of us who've grown up with the Eucharist being every Sunday. But it was I've heard people say, this was really powerful for me to remember these prayers and these forms and have them brought back into my life.
Yeah. I think that a fallacy that we can fall into is seeing morning prayer or the daily office as something less than Eucharist. And I think what it brought home to me is how powerful it is, and how it's just as much worship, if not more so in some ways, than Eucharist. And one petition really for morning prayer stands out this year: "Thy saving health among all nations," and suffrages A. And how when we pray that, we're really feeling that right now, because we see it on the news, we're experiencing it among our neighbors, among our parishioners, and how we're really calling out to God for that, for thy saving health among all nations. And talk about that need for embodiment that we experience in prayer. I think we have really felt that this year.
And when we get to the end, for me, in morning prayer, it's always that collect for mission at the end that prays for peace for those who are far off and for those who are near. That every morning prayer, you have to end with one of these ways of looking out at people who aren't with you, right? It points you in that direction. And I think in a better way than our ending Eucharistic Thanksgiving prayer, right? Which is like, okay, now you go and see them and bring God's joy and peace into the world. Well, now we're actually, focusing on those people who aren't able to be here, and that we actually aren't going to go and but in a way, right? Like we just are that separate from one another. So
yeah.
We've had quite a few comments coming through from people's. Kendra Martin says that she grew up with morning prayer every Sunday and Eucharist once a month. I think that's what Paul was, or Scott was saying, that for some people this was a remembrance. For me, it certainly was a return to something that I had, was an important practice for me when I entered the Episcopal Church, was starting a practice of daily prayer through morning prayer, and my priest walked me through it, and it's always been whether I've said it alone or in person, it's always been a really meaningful thing for me too, just from a personal thing.
Yeah. Way up at the top, Rachel Prim mentioned, love to bring up that the body comes up in the equation, especially when we typically hear so often that our bodies are temporary.
Right.
That's something we haven't said aloud, I think, in that way in this conversation, this idea of the putting aside the old notion that the body is just a container for the soul and dispensable and less than, and really embracing the deep wisdom of the tradition, going back into the Hebrew scriptures, that body and soul are of a piece. And even images of resurrection are not of disembodied spirits just floating off. It's this, we talk in terms of resurrection of the body.
Yeah,
helpful to know.
And and we mentioned John already, the Gospel of John, that there's something almost super embodied about this resurrection scene. It's not that Jesus is a ghost able to walk through walls. It's that the walls are suddenly insubstantial to him, right? Because he's still eating the food, he's still interacting, you can still touch him. It's that everything around him is suddenly a sort of shadowy substance that isn't quite real and realized yet. And that's where we point to.
Yeah.
I think of the communion of saints too, and we've unfortunately, or depending on your outlook, we've added a lot to the communion of saints this year, both as a church and as a nation, as a world. But I think one of our prayers is we pray that people go from strength to strength in whatever the transition to life is, that perhaps there is embodied work to be done in the next life, which is powerful. And I think gives us hope too, that this embodiment continues and that we have this connection with all the dear bodies and souls as one that we lost this year.
Yeah.
They're still with us.
Jill has a really important comment here. She says, speaking of embodiment, I miss my pew, my favorite windows, my lumpy red cushions. The touchstones are important to me. I struggle with everything having the same delivery system of the screen. I feel like a passive receiver a lot of the time, and that troubles me. Same. Same. That's been what I've been thinking about in terms of the danger of doing this on the internet, is that the church becomes another Netflix series, or, that we are sort of creating a pattern of worship that is receptive based rather than responsive, rather than embodied. So
Yeah, and Jill, to flip that around from this perspective too, back in the spring when Easter came, we had already had liturgy as we known it wiped off the table. So Easter, we were still not having a few people in the church. Christmas Eve was the first time I had to step in that pulpit, not even having the 25 or 30 people who can, or for the 30 households up to that can sit safely in the Calvary nave. And it's exactly what you're describing, Jill, from the other direction. It feels so much more like launching whatever I have out, hoping it makes its way out into across this abyss. So the question becomes for me, for you, and for me in this, what does it take for us to name that and grieve that, and then compensate for it? What are the ways that, because the lumpy cushions matter.
They do.
We're talking about bodily memory. We're talking about memory not of ideas, but things we see and feel and touch. That's really important to name and grieve and make part of the conversation when we say what are the choices we're going to make given the circumstances today.
Which is why we've strived at every point to do the utmost that we can to make an in-person possibility available to people. If you want to come into the church, it's not the same as being here with 300 people in the house, but that we've been, and we worked hard from the beginning, working with doctors to make sure that we're following the protocols that need to be followed, to make sure that you're safe while you do this, but that your lumpy cushions matter, the pews matter. Our liturgies are bodily things, right? We have real bread and wine. Well, the bread is slightly real, but
But
our
you can't taste it, but you can feel it.
Yeah. Our spaces are places that are devoted to the experience of beauty, right? And that's another thing that's not so common and not so accessible when I am sitting looking at a screen or in my house, right? The experience of communal beauty is a part of what our liturgy has for us. So yeah, we're grieving right there too. What else did we have here? Who knew about Saint Chrysostom before, without morning prayer? True. 2 or 3 are gathered.
The golden tongue.
Where 2 or 3 are gathered. That's right. That's our prayer. Live streaming is fine. Christina says, I've missed the communion ritual, but morning prayer has also been great. Good deal.
Another thing that comes to mind is that liturgical people remind us that liturgy is primary theology. What we do with our bodies is doing theology. It's not pretty things that we do to represent the good ideas we have about God. We're actually coming to understand who God is with our bodies. And so when we name these ways when that's been inhibited, that's what we're struggling with. Like, part of the way I learn about God is by being in a room with Jill and her lumpy cushions in her favorite window, right? That's part of the practice, is encountering one another in worship, standing and kneeling, and all of these. So how do we acknowledge that and make decisions, the best decisions we can to minister to one another? That's do theology, understand God together in our bodies.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, there's a whole other, maybe we'll do some next week. We'll continue the conversation too, but another realm of this for me is moral formation, which I think there's a very similar conversation about how we're formed kind of as moral creatures and ethical creatures that I'd love for us to kind of explore at some point too. You know, is morality about here's the right thing to do and there's the wrong thing to do, so choose the right thing, or is it go deeper down into kind of our deeper responses that our bodies have to the world? I think that's related to the liturgy, but it's another place I find myself wanting to go in my reflections on what's happening to us and among us. And
Yeah.
these
And
days.
for me too, I've been reflecting a lot on inequity in how this is playing out among us. I heard a commentator say that what he's taken from this experience is that now working class means you have a job that you can't do from home. That our world is still ticking on in all sorts of embodied ways. And so what can the church say about this predicament, that these people who are working class, who are, emptying the garbage, who are stocking the shelves, who are delivering the groceries, where is the church in this? Yeah, essential. And how do we understand our role in that conversation too?
Yeah.
So I think we've about reached our end of our time. Just wanted to say thank you. We will be back at this next week, kind of cracking open these other teaser questions that we've thrown out there and reflecting a little more. What we hope you will do is send us, email us, or comment some of your own questions as you've struggled with what it means to be in relationship with God and others. Let us know so that we can have that on our minds this week as we think about, as we think forward to 9:00 next Sunday. Anything else there?
No, this is great. Thanks. That'll help us transcend what Jill identified as the one-way transmission. I love seeing these ways that we workarounds. That's what we call them, right? Workarounds.
That's it.
Workaround.
Workarounds.
Well, thank you all. We will see you in about 15 minutes from Calvary's nave, and our prayers will be with you. See y'all later.